Terrific.
There you go.
And do we need to reread that?
Sure, I will do them.
Just to be on the safe side.
So we're opening the meeting, and this is a statement regarding Zoom meetings or remote meetings. On June 16th, 2021, Governor Baker signed into law an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This includes an extension until April 1, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions. There's March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The notice is posted, and the Zoom link was posted with the notice.
Thanks a lot, Bill, again. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order with a roll call. George.
Present.
Nate.
I'm here.
Great. Jack.
Here.
Robert.
Yeah.
And I am here, and Brian is on leave of absence. Okay, terrific. Thank you. Well, at this point, our first agenda item is the town administrator's message. So I'd like to turn it over to the town administrator. Take it away, Bob.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I think I'd like to try to share my screen. I should have that status. And I'm wondering if you can see the graphic up there. Is that sharing at all?
Yeah, we can see your screen, Bob. I think you need to pick another share item.
Yeah, we're seeing your Zoom webpage.
All right, let's do a new share. How's that? Better?
There you go.
Mhm. See a nice
Okay.
sandcastle.
Can everyone see the lovely can-do sun sand
Yes.
sculpture that epitomizes the hopeful feelings that we have here in Yarmouth, I think, better than any picture that I could find. Thank you. I'm really happy to be kind of kicking off the budget process. I'll try not to go too long, but I want to answer any questions that folks have. Before I get things underway, I do want to acknowledge all of our department heads here in town and the division heads for all of the work that they've done on this budget process. You know, it's been a lot of work in terms of bringing me up to speed on their individual operations. I took the time to meet with each and every division and every department, and, you know, kind of a painstaking process to go through all of the programs and almost every penny in the budget. And folks really went out of their way to make sure that I was well informed. And I want to thank Bill also for all of his great work in just organizing a lot of our efforts and, you know, getting the committee's process off the ground. But most of all, I want to give some special thanks to our finance director, Ed Centio, not only for his work in the budget process, but for his patience and guidance in the whole almost year that I've been here, all the work that he's done to try to bring me up to speed on a lot of the complex financial issues facing the town. You know, Ed's really a talented guy, and it's a pleasure of mine to work with him. We come at things from a slightly different angle, but together, you know, I think we've laid these numbers pretty well bare, and you could feel confident that, you know, you could ask a question to Ed or information from me, and, you know, you'd hear the same type of message because, you know, we've spent so much time poring over these numbers. And as we've done that, our town accountant, Maria Ruseva, also, you know, see her too much out front, but she does a tremendous amount of work with the finances in the background, and has been a great help and a teacher to me. And I hope you received the books. Everyone's got their budget materials in front of them. And I know Mary Alice Florio and Pam Barnes, you know, worked very hard on making sure that everything was timely in that respect. So It really was a team effort, and I'm happy to be kicking the budget process off. I really was strong on this. I worked together with Bill. I wanted to take the absolute first opportunity that I could to meet with the finance committee as soon as the budgets were due by charter. We finished it up right around December 31, and we've been preparing the documents to give you ever since then. So I'm glad the first meeting in January to just be able to give you a little overview. And I think it'll help as you go through the individual departmental budgets. And of course, any budget process that I work with, really what it starts with is a detailed analysis of the revenue picture over a period of time that is at least a 5-year period. And what you have in your packets and support in the budget material is a 7-year detailed analysis of the revenues that support all of the town services here in Yarmouth. And, we go right over every area of revenue and then consolidate them in charts and things like you see here. It's important to look at it over a longer period of time so that we can break down some of the trends, assess the performance, see what adjustments need to be made. And as you can surmise, that extra detail going back helps serve as a platform that we can use for financial planning to review what potential revenues that we'll see over time. But a lot of what I'd like to do is to try to demystify the whole issue of what the revenues are that support our operations. And they really are broken down into 3 major categories. I mean, you should know that the key reliant factor in the town's budget is the property tax with over 71%. We are very much reliant on that property tax. It's at a higher level than we see in other parts of the state. And that's largely owing to this very, very small piece. And, one of the biggest problems that we have in our budget, and this is endemic of the Cape and Islands across our region, we see these ridiculously small amounts of state aid at 1% of the revenue mix. It's really very small. Town, our comparable size in other parts of the Commonwealth would be in a 30 to 40% leverage position with state aid. And we receive only 1% because we're penalized because of the equalized valuation of the property down here. We're mistakenly viewed as an affluent community when the actual wages in our community are very low. That if the wages as opposed to property value were used as the state aid formula, it would be a much different situation. And so we're going to see in the trends how that 1% does hurt us. And largely, another big piece that we're going to talk about is the non-property tax local revenues that come in at 28% of the budget. And I think having this sort of chart in mind is very important as we view fiscal year 2023 is largely a transitional year. I think we can see the last 2 fiscal years, FY21 and FY22, is very atypical in terms of our financial performance and in terms of the whole backdrop under which the town operated. Those pandemic years had a tremendous impact on the town's finances. And what we're attempting to do in fiscal year 2023 is to try to restore both the funding levels and the sources of funding that were temporarily impacted by the pandemic. And we're trying to do that at the same time where we're fighting what is a growing plague of inflation that's kind of going across the nation right now. And it's impacting our services tremendously in terms of rising costs in many of the sectors of the economy that we depend on tremendously. And I would say, just to talk a little bit about the impacts of the pandemic, the financial management of the town in fiscal years 21 and 22, I thought was very strong in being able to, the town was assisted tremendously in the quick actions to limit spending, and not just the spending, but spending and the estimated revenues in those years. As a result, if you recall, going back in FY 21 to that March timeframe right before FY 21 started, March of 2020 was when the first wave of the pandemic hit. And that spring was accompanied by practically a complete economic shutdown. And, we felt that this 28% of the non-property tax local revenues, which is really comprised of a laundry list of individual items that, taken as a whole, are all very much conditioned by economic circumstances. When the economic shutdown happened, there was a tremendous fear that that segment of the local revenues was going to decline very rapidly. And some of the items that make up those non-property tax local revenues, we take in nearly 4 million a year in motor vehicle excise taxes. And I know you saw the sheet that Ed had prepared that kind of gets right to that point, lists, and I hope you have that kind of in front of you, each and every one of those local estimated receipts. The meals tax is in there, the rooms tax is in there. Although we have, some of the charges and things like solid waste fees, all the recreational fees are in there. And also very importantly, all of the building permit fees. And so what had happened in 2020 is that quick action was needed in examining this section of the revenues and making some adjustments so that when we went to town meeting for the FY 21 budget, those revenues were not overestimated. And at that time, what had happened was the estimates for those revenues were decreased. And alongside of that, the spending was decreased. And what that served to do is to give us a little breath so that the town could overcome the pandemic without having a situation that we had massive deficits. And as a result of those strong actions, we saw collections did not decline as much as were estimated, and is what helped to fuel building up some of the free cash. And it puts us in a position now that we're trying to get over those impacts, both in terms of having the lowered revenue estimates, the lower spending, and we're trying to return to the normal levels of collection based on our performance. So as we look at some of those forces that are impacting the town's budget, it puts us in a good position to start looking very closely at some of those long-term revenue trends. And that really goes a long way towards coloring just how, why, and when the town is able to emerge from the pandemic and get on a more realistic viewpoint moving forward. So I think that's a good jumping off point to get into some of the actual trends and how they've impacted us and how they impact us moving forward. And I would start with the state aid. And again, it's not quite as interesting as that lovely hat-shaped trend line that you see, which is always cause for concern when you see a trend line over an extended period like this that doesn't have much rhyme or reason. What it indicates is that the state aid that the town receives is not necessarily a function just of the economy, but it's a function of the political forces that are at play at the time that those state budgets are established. And a chart like this that goes up precipitously and then drops right down if that was one of our larger revenue categories, it would be cause for tremendous concern, but it's probably the only silver lining in the state aid that the high point and the low point here are within 100,000, 60,000 of each other. Let's go back and look at that just for another minute. So, what you can see is that with a small blip in FY20, that our net state aid jumped a little bit over 800,000. We've really been very, very steady in the net state aid of between 730, 740,000, just under 750,000. And just so you know how that whole state aid piece works, there's two pieces of it. There's the aid that the town gets, which is roughly 1.7 million. But in conjunction with that, there's also charges. I'm sure you've heard of the cherry sheet charges. They total almost $1 million. So what we're estimating for FY23, which will be about probably, we feel the same as FY22, we'll take in gross about 1.7 million, and with $963,000 of charges, the net funds that we'll have available to support the budget will only be in the $730,000 range. And again, that should be 4 times that. And to underscore some of what I was saying about the local estimated receipts, this is that material that you received the financial report on, and it comprises the 28% here. It's the lion's share of that 28% is reflected in this chart right here. And what you see is some nice growth between 2017, 18, and this kind of 4-year period, very stable local estimated receipt revenue. And then when we get into the FY 2021 stage, when the economic shutdown happened at the end of the fiscal year of 2020, the estimates for FY 2021, which are reflected here, were decreased by approximately 25%. And in conjunction with that decrease in those estimated receipts, spending was in turn decreased as well. And remember, this is a chart, and we talked about this last night a little. This shows the estimates. We were fortunate to see the actual collections did decline more in the 6 to 7% range. So we didn't, the actual would have looked kind of like moving in this direction, but right up in here. So we took a conservative philosophy, which I think was very wise, done by the leaders at that time, and lowered these revenue estimates kind of very conservatively, which allows us over, you see, the next 2 years to recover from the impacts of that economic slowdown. We had a partial recovery in FY22, and we look to recover more towards the FY20 levels in FY23. And again, which I'm going to do a new chart. I think it's going to be very interesting to overlay over this chart the actuals. And I'll if you follow, can everyone see my cursor? It would look like in 20 to 21, we had a slight dip, and in 22, it would have increased higher into this level. And in FY23, we hope that it'll be more a little bit in this level. And what is very important to note is that we still feel that the FY23 local estimated receipts are somewhat conservative, as well they should be, given, number one, the pandemic's just continued presence with all the new cases and all of the economic uncertainty that surrounds that. We are estimating receipts at levels slightly below what were actually collected in the previous year, which were in the throes of the pandemic. We think that the pandemic will continue to stifle somewhat the local estimated receipt growth, but at this level, we feel it's conservative enough to still build a small overage in collections over the estimates, which is extremely important in fueling the town's fund balance. And I just want to point out, when we're making these types of estimates, if the estimate is about 90% range of what you're collecting, that's very healthy. And 10% of those, any excess collections would help fuel the fund balance, which the town depends on from year to year. If you made the mistake of overestimating these local estimated receipts and you under collected that amount, that's a very serious problem because it creates deficits. It forces you to go back in and cut budgets, and it could be very harmful to services. So when I say the transitional year, a big part of the transition is moving the local estimated receipts back to the levels of our collections over the past several years, setting up a more consistent trend line, and also not being careful not to overestimate these, and using these funds to restore to the budget a number of the items that have been removed and funded from outside sources during this period when we were, hedging against the economic slowdown. And the real good news for the finances in town is that by far the largest revenue source is a very stable, slow growing, and steady revenue source. That the property taxes based on the values that we have in town have been very stable, very sustainable. We're going through a period right now where the values are perhaps growing a little faster than we would like to see them. I don't think in our region there's much of a chance of a major decline, but we could very well see those levels of increase in property value level off, curtail a little bit. The good part about it doesn't directly impact the tax levy, as the values have been growing very, very fast. That would simply lower the tax rate, and it doesn't lower what you collect in property taxes. And we hope to see throughout the future, another 10 years of property tax levy growth that is slow, consistent, and provides the sustainability that we need in our budget. This year, the property taxes are going up a little bit more than normal. And that is as a result of, hang on a sec, I've got company. Okay.
That's all right, Bob. I have a snoring dog that people are going to hear, so no worries.
What we're seeing with the property tax this year is the addition of some new exempt debt. And the biggest one is the new debt for the middle school. The bonds have been sold, and that's going to hit us in full force in 23. So you're going to see the exempt debt, which had been held very, very low. The town's debt had been falling off quite rapidly, to the extent that, trying to make room for the new infrastructure projects that we've got coming on. The non-exempt debt is down under 400,000, very, very low number there. And even the exempt debt had gone down probably to the 2.5 million range, but you're going to see about a 36% growth for the exempt debt this year. And that's primarily to take care of that middle school. So that's in there. With these trends.
Bob, could I just ask you a quick
Yeah.
question? Could you define the difference between exempt and non-exempt debt?
Yes, sir.
Exempt from what?
So there's two types of debt service that the town can take on, and it all revolves around Proposition 2.5.
Oh, you've explained it. I got it. Never mind.
So the good news is the debt that we have to cover inside Prop 2.5 is very, very low. It's like less than 400,000. So that debt is not impacting town services. And the new debt that's gonna raise the tax rate a little bit is outside of 2.5. So it's tough that that's gonna, we have to pay the debt. It's for the school and we approved the
Yeah.
project. But at least being exempt, it won't compete with other town services like the normal school budget. So with those trends in mind, and I have to really stop myself. I could go on, forever. It's kind of my hobby, looking at the economic trends and the revenues and things. But I want to give you just an overview from my standpoint, and I think I include the whole finance team on this. What we've been trying to achieve and the major challenges that we have together moving forward for this year's budget. I've narrowed them down to about 5 key things to talk about. Is what we're trying to do is restore these local estimated receipts to pre-pandemic levels, which is consistent with our actual collections, that we've reached that point where it's time to do that. It's no longer okay to artificially push those down, that we need to use the economic trending and restore those receipts. But again, it's very critical that we don't overestimate. We don't grow those too fast. So it's transitional. It's not just jumping them way up. It's taking the steps to, reach the actual levels without going too far, given that things are still, we're not completely out of the woods. And if we can restore some of those revenues to our revenue picture, what it will enable us to do, we're hoping to restore, and it's not just the capital, but I call out the capital and roadway funding because together they're almost $3 million. That's an enormous chunk of money that over time, it used to be in the underneath Prop 2.5 tax levy. And in order to deal with rising costs, shrinking revenues, the pandemic, these capital funds and the roadway funding have been taken out of free cash. So by having the revenues back up to the levels that are more realistic, it enables us to restore some of this capital roadway funding. Now, I want to point out, and then we'll talk about this a little bit, more, is that it's not just capital and roadway. There's a whole laundry list of things. All the CARES Act money was being used, kind of for revenue replacement, things such as the IT budgets that, we need to fund, election budget. Another area is human services. All of those things were funded outside of the budget last year. So in addition to the capital and the roadway funds, we've got other items that we're trying to make the budget whole again. We're trying to fund our operating budgets to meet the service needs within the limits of Prop 2.5. We don't want to see free cash used too much to support the operating budget. And that's something that's going to take a couple of years to do, but it's an overarching goal and it's a major challenge. And that's one of the things that's coloring our budget process. The regional education spending formula can be very volatile. And what we're trying to do is provide the resources to meet that regional educational need without sacrificing other town services. And I think that that's very important, that I look across the board, that education is perhaps the most important service we provide. But you still need to have a police department, a highway department, fire department, and all the town departments. So it's not a matter of pitting one against the other. And I mention this because it's critically important, given all of the pressure that you see on the revenues and the items we're trying to stick back in the budget and the dealing with the regional education. We have a policy of the Board of Selectmen to reserve short-term rental income for wastewater pre-funding. And we need to make sure that we do that because, I'm a little concerned, and we're working on the wastewater funding strategies to make them more structural. And by that, I mean, currently, we have a policy that we voted at town meeting last year for 1 year to take the short-term rental income and to put it in the wastewater fund. Now, that's something we have to do every year. And what we're looking to do is try to make those wastewater funding items more structural so that they can be set up once and they continue. Because once we get into a position where we're selling these bonds for all of this wastewater, we can't be relying on whether town meeting wants to put the short-term rental in or not. I mean, it's something that we're gonna have to work to improve on that. So general,
Can I just pause you and ask a question on that?
yes, certainly.
Are you thinking of a stabilization account? For the
Well,
short-term rental
no,
money?
I'm not thinking of a stabilization account because we've created the enterprise fund, which serves as that. So funds can be placed in the enterprise fund. But if you want an analogy, look at the difference between the enterprise fund and transferring short-term rental income as opposed to the WIF that we created.
Mhm.
What we created with the WIF is we took an annual ongoing revenue and made it structural, and we created the fund. Now, every year, that amount is automatically transferred into that fund. And the future types of funding that we need to do is along those same lines to identify the types of the revenue sources that can automatically be transferred to meet those needs. And those, are a lot of the revenues that we're contemplating for wastewater. And one area that we need to tighten up on is anything that needs an annual vote into the fund. It would be better if potentially we may seek legislation to devote a section of this rental income to that fund every year. But to my way of thinking, when you have debt service at stake, it's always better to have structural versus year by year funding sources. Does that make sense?
I 100% agree. The reason I bring that up is I was involved in a coalition that actually pushed towns when the wastewater funding for the first became available with short-term rentals to have communities adopt the local option state statute under Chapter 40 that allows for a community investment and stabilization fund, I think. And I believe it would be something like that would be sort of structural.
Right, and funded by those revenues every year. Exactly. That's what we need.
Yeah, that was sort of just my thought on that. Okay,
Great idea.
I have language if you need it.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Send it over to Bill, and we're working on those issues right now. So, general overview, you have before you a total recommended budget of 101,904, and it's up on its face 6.7% from last year, but not all just new spending. You've got a lot of money that's returning to the budget from outside sources that so it was a little bit artificially low. You have a lot of the new debt service that we talked about that's in there pumping up the budget. And there's also, the new wastewater enterprise fund that wasn't there last year. So all those supplement what would ordinarily be about 2.5% of growth, but it's up and the revenues are up to support it. Right now, as the budget is recommended, the capital spending will be recommended for this fiscal year to continue from free cash, but we're eyeing a portion of the roadway maintenance budget to be moved under the levy budget. The total recommendation right now reserves approximately $750,000 of levy capacity for that purpose. It's just a mathematical reality. It was my goal going in to take the entire 3 million, but there is simply not enough money to do that and to meet the other obligations that we have. So I think it's going to take 3 or 4 years to move all of that capital and roadway maintenance back in. But so far, we've identified 750 to start that process. And another item that I wanted to call out is that the education expenses have been set aside for 2.5% increase. But these expenses may rise faster than the overall budget. There's a shift in enrollment of almost 1%. It's just under 1%. So we're going to have to deal with that. The school budget isn't necessarily in, but if there are any funds that they're looking for over 2.5%, we're going to have to find a source for, whether it's an override. Hopefully it won't steal money from what we hope to transfer back in the budget, but these items tend to create a lot of tension working against each other. As far as the regular budgets, most of the budgets are level funded, some very minor adjustments, all designed to remain within the Prop 2.5 time frame. And I don't want to take too much time. I know you've got a lot of folks to hear from tonight, but I just want to give you an overview on the expense side of some of the highlights to look for in the budget, things that I'd like to call out to your attention. One of those items that was an outside article was last year's contracted salary and wage increases, and we've moved those into the operating budget for FY23. But that's funded from an article last year and funded from the budget this year. So we're lucky they're reasonable wage increases. You know, you're talking 2% COLAs, things like that, that are lower than the 2.5%, but there's almost like a 2-year hit in moving from funding them from the article to back into the budget. I talked about some of the inflation that we're facing. If you take what are so-called overhead items, largely the insurance related things in retirement that we don't have a direct impact at lowering, we're already the lowest, I think, on the Cape at 50% contribution for health insurance. That's estimated to be up 6%. Our town insurances, it says 8, but it looks like more like they're up 10% for town's insurance. Our retirement, in conjunction with the actuarial analysis, is up 13.1%, and Medicare costs are up 5%. Now you take just those 4 items as a whole, that's almost $700,000 in new spending that we have to put in the budget to keep up with these overhead items. And so look for that. Again, the regional education spending has been provided for at a 2.5% increase. Anything higher than that, we'll have to find some additional funding. Did I miss one? Overall, we talked about the debt service is increasing for the new middle school, but it is exempt. We did talk about that. There are a series of small adjustments made to better enable some of the individual departments to handle their current flow of work. You'll see some of those this evening. I want to point out a couple to you. For example, we took some of the part-time human resources and the board and committee support that were funded from free cash last year. And those are permanent expenses and they won't go away. And so we're trying to move that into the levy budget. Seems a consistent theme of these long-term costs that have been removed from the budget. We're trying to restore those. We have some minor additional hours added to the finance department, which will help us to handle the flow of work in that department without new staffing. And I do salute the finance department for coming up with some innovative ways of making the workflow work without having new people. Now, I want to point out that we've restored the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. I know you're very familiar with that. That is the fund that is reserved for emergency and unforeseen expenses and is administered by the Finance Committee. And that is recommended at a level of $100,000. And I think when budgets are tight, it's very important to have that. I'm very confident in the stewardship of the Finance Committee, but if we put those funds aside, if we do have a big problem, you'll be able to assess it and take some action on it. But you'll see that item in the budget. We've had to beef up the advertising budgets across the board with the loss of the register. Our advertising costs, things that we're required to advertise, are going through the roof. We're going to need more money for that. The election budget has a pretty good increase that reflects both the removal of the CARES Act funding, which we had a lot of CARES Act funding that helped with elections, but also the state elections have an increase with the early voting and the primaries. There's more state elections this year, and we anticipate higher town meeting costs by moving town meeting from the weekend where we can get it done in a day to during the week where it may take 2 to 3 days. That increases the costs of holding those meetings. I mentioned human services was funded through the CARES Act last year. We've moved that to the health department at last year's level of 60,000. That was 100,000 at one time, but we've at least put it in at 60. So you'll see some of the facilities maintenance budgets and cleaning costs, slight upgrade on those. We just haven't been keeping up with the work that's needed, and I don't want to see the town's buildings degrade. Then all of a sudden we need larger capital funds. Police department reflects some of the costs, the actual costs. Some of their line items were lower than necessary, and then we would be transferring sums of money into those throughout the year, and we're trying to avoid a lot of the transfers in to service these budgets. Fire wages, keep in mind that we've put the FY22 levels in there because the negotiations are pending, but we will ultimately have a settlement, and we're going to need to reserve some funds to be able to meet that. Another budget we're trying to rebuild is the tree maintenance budget. It's been all funded by separate articles. We're going to continue to do that, but we're trying to restore at least somewhat of a budget. You'll see that. And repair and maintenance budgets, again, that is between inflation and just going many, many years of level funding. There's not enough money to do the maintenance of the equipment, maintenance of vehicles. This is going to be reflected in the highway department, in the DNR, in the harbor master department, and some of the police vehicle maintenance as well. Shellfish propagation, we're supporting to maintain those program levels. Very small money, but I call it out because it's extremely important. A little money goes a long way in terms of preserving, the sort of cultural heritage of our community. There is a housing inspector position that's been added to the health department that will provide better safety and health in all of the rental properties. And this is going to be supported through the fees, and it requires a vote of the Board of Selectmen. So we're going to have a separate hearing on this, and they're going to come in with their fee structure, and it's going to be evaluated by the board. My position on it is that it is, let's see, where were we? It's very needed. It would be a tremendous benefit, but we have to look at and I would appreciate your help in looking at the details on the financing of that to make sure it's not going to take from other departments. Parks budget, similarly, we increased to accommodate the new policies down at Grays Beach. There's a whole new program down there with staffing, but the new stickers that are required down there pay for this. So it's not going to compete with things, but that's money that needs to go in the budget. You'll see the golf budget increased to meet the demands of the additional play that we've seen, but also within the funding limits of the enterprise fund. So it's not going to be subsidized by the general fund in any way. But I would point out, and you're going to hear in detail, that when you have more play to maintain that experience, there are some additional costs. And again, we've reserved levy capacity. At this point, it's at 750,000 to return a share, a little more than half of the highway maintenance budget to the operating budget, and we hope to make more progress from there. I know I've probably gone a little too long. I could go on another hour, but I want to let you, get to meet with the department heads. They've got a great story to tell. I want to let you know I'm here to answer any questions that you might have now, or else to come back. I can come back every week if you want, and I'll be together with you folks throughout this entire budget process to be very accountable, answer any questions, and just assist your review in any way I can.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. We really appreciate the thorough overview. Can we get a copy of this presentation emailed to us following the meeting?
Madam Chair, it should be in your books in the front. It's in black and white. It's right behind the first section,
So it
which
is.
is a budget message, yes.
Okay, terrific.
If I may, one of our department heads has a program obligation. The recreation department, she has to go to a program. If we can take that up, and then if we have questions for Bob, we can go to those directly after the recreation. She has to get to a program soon.
If Bob doesn't mind sticking around. Works
Just,
for me.
it shouldn't be that long for rec.
Okay, well, let's move on to rec.
All right, let me share the screen with the recreation presentation. And
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
there you go. You should have the recreation presentation up in front of you.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Sorry to cut you short, Bob. I do have to run out to a program. So I am Amy Howell. I'm the rec director. The rec department's mission statement is to strive to meet the needs of our residents and visitors by providing facilities, services, and activities that are representative of the best practices of our profession through affordable, comprehensive, and accessible offerings. We build our town brand, enrich people's lives, and contribute to the total development of the individual and family while fostering a sense of community. We draw people here to contribute to our economy and to make Yarmouth strong. So some key points of the past year, as everyone knows, unfortunately, we were still severely impacted by COVID. We were able to double our number of kids at camp to over 200 a week. We're still not up to our pre-COVID numbers of 300 a week due to all the COVID guidelines that we strictly follow through the state guidelines and the town. But we were named the best summer camp on the Cape in the Cape Cod Times best of the best. So we are pretty proud of that accomplishment. We have a great staff down at Flax. We're able to, big thing, which is where I'm going tonight, is bring our basketball league back, which we had to cancel for a year due to COVID, and have over 250 kids in the league. So we're super excited to have that back, along with running our sailing and tennis, even able to add some new programs, this year as well. So we had over 2,000 community members in our programs in the past year. And we're hoping to grow that this year as long as the pandemic cooperates. Beaches lifeguards, everyone struggled with shortage of lifeguards, but as did we, but we still responded to over 100 incidents and were able to maintain the safety of the community and the beaches, and the staff just worked extremely hard. So it was another good summer. So for the budget overview, you can see in our salary line for, this is the general fund is the top line. Has gone up to 484,937. On the next slide, I'll kind of explain the differences. Expenses stayed level funded as were requested. And then our offset accounts, we lowered that. We've pretty much, the reason our offset is lower is just we're trying to get in line with realistic expectations that the pandemic is still happening and it's still affecting our numbers. So we haven't reached, again, even close to pre-pandemic receipts. And so we're just trying to kind of see where we're at and stay a little bit more and the actual number.
Next one.
Yeah, please. So the big changes you'll see in the salary line is the community services director position has been removed. due to retirement, and an assistant rec director position has moved back in to that line. The large increase is pretty much the seasonal increase to the lifeguards, and you'll see about 100,000 if you look at the detailed reports, but it's about $100,000 more that we're looking for our lifeguard wages this season, and that is reflecting basically last summer we went to an emergency and we raised the rates $1.50. So now this is why you're seeing, now we're adding another 50 cents to that raise. And so that's why you're seeing such a drastic difference in our seasonal wage request is pretty much that. For the offset, the wage increases are the same thing. It's pretty much all the seasonal wage increases. And expenses, again, those have stayed level funded. So challenges, the biggest challenge for us is obviously we're a department that relies on a ton of seasonal help. And everyone knows the market right now and what everyone is struggling to find staff. And unfortunately, you know, as a municipality, we cannot keep up with what private markets are offering for wages. And so it's making it very hard to attract staff. We've increased our wages through our lifeguards. We've increased them through all of our programs when we're looking for seasonal help, and we're still struggling to get the help, as is everyone. Because of the wage increases, inflation, you're seeing such high rising costs that we have to keep up, and so our fees are rising as well. And now it's hard to find a balance between, you know, affordable programming and recovering these costs that we're having to put out. And at some point, you know, the programs just aren't becoming affordable anymore. So it's a balance, just trying to find ways to offset that. One way to offset that is to get a revolving account for recreation. I know I've asked for it for a couple of years and I'll continue to ask for it. You know, with an offset account, we start at zero for our programs every fiscal year. So with all these rising costs, with the wages and fees and maintenance, now we have to automatically recoup that to be able to pay it off, which means the fees are high. Any surprise maintenance costs that come in, we don't have any type of backup, so we have to make that through program fees, and we have to account for that. So it makes it extremely hard, again, to keep our fees affordable for the community. Next. So recommendations, the biggest thing is just really trying to remain competitive with our wages. Again, we're at a disadvantage to the private companies. You know, we have to find different ways to recruit staff. You know, obviously we'll never be able to compete wage-wise, so we need to find a different way to recruit the seasonal staff, but also stay competitive as well. You know, we can't be the lowest community and expect to bring in help. And then if we were able to have a revolving account, you know, we'd be able to roll over any existing revenue to the next fiscal year, which really would allow us to keep our fees lower in down years like the last 2 years in a pandemic. We'd be able to fund a lot of our smaller capital projects instead of having to go to capital all the time. We'd be able to maintain our equipment and our facilities with all of these rising maintenance costs and not have to put that cost automatically into fees. And we'd be able to subsidize special events and programs, you know, by rolling over to the next year. So that's all I have. Any questions you guys have?
Thanks so much, Amy. I'll open it up to members of the committee for their questions. Jack, I see you unmuted. Did you have a question?
No, no, I'm good.
Okay. Anybody else?
Let me just ask a question about concept here. You said seemed to imply that you want to avoid having to have a capital budget. What kind of capital items do you have?
So we go to capital, we've gone to capital for some smaller projects. This year it was picnic tables, which is about $24,000. Walkie-talkies, which was about $24,000 that we got approved. And so we have these smaller requests and they've been approved, but if we can roll over a revolving fund, we won't have to go for that smaller amount. We'll be able to just fund that out of our revolving account.
Well, that raises a second question. What kind of funds have you been able to roll over? Is that a result of bad budgeting in a current fiscal year?
We don't roll over any funds.
Well, so that won't be a source. That's the point I'm really making. So that won't be a source anyway.
So we have leftover funds, but if we have leftover funds, it goes into the general fund so that we start over at zero. So really, if we take in these funds, right, and we have a surplus of $10,000 or $20,000, now we can use that to put back into the programs, whether it's maintenance costs or subsidizing a special event, things like that. But right now, we don't have that ability because we start at zero. So anything.
The other point I'm making is, isn't that encouraging sandbagging?
I mean, we're not looking to, that's why there's caps on revolving accounts, but I would say probably most every town recreation department has a revolving account. To be able to do this, to be able to subsidize programs, a special event or winter carnival, keeping the fees low. Right now, with these rising costs, we'd be able to subsidize some of them. Maybe, as we've talked about, it's inflation right now, so it goes back to normal. So this year we'd be able to, instead of having to raise all the fees so much, we'd be able to just raise them minimally.
An
Thank you.
interesting topic. It might be good to have, once we get through the budget season and we have more quieter times, maybe we could bring Bob and Bill back and Ed to talk about that concept. I think it would make sense to talk about it holistically across a number of departments rather than just sort of one at a time. Any other questions from the members? I did have a couple questions that I had sent over email. I don't know if you had a chance to look at them.
I did, yes. The first question was, I think I answered that, which was the community services director was retiring. And so the assistant rec director position was put in place of that one.
Yeah, you had mentioned last year that the need to have a programmer. Is that what the?
Yes, yep. It's the role, but a higher role.
All right, so you're getting what you need essentially.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, we're
that's
excited.
kind of what I wanted to make sure of.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, you identified definitely some, the concerns about competition with private industry, other towns. I think that absolutely is something, again, we should maybe look at across a number of departments and be thinking about kind of projection wise, how much more are we going to be having to pay for? And, as we look at projected expenses over the next number of years and compare that with projected revenues, so we can kind of figure out what the delta is. But did you have any other ideas or solutions, or have you had any conversations with any other of your counterparts in other towns about, other options? Obviously, raising salaries makes a ton of sense, but are there other things that have been explored in addition to that?
It's so we meet, all the rec directors meet every couple months. And so we all talk about these same issues, and, it's nice that we're all having these same issues, but it's the same issues. And, and so really the only thing, I mean, money is a huge thing. The towns, they're all going back, specifically lifeguards, that's a huge one. And they're all going back to try and raise the fees. That is the biggest thing. And then the other is really like on our part, doing a better job of, giving them, the tangibles, like besides money, right? That it's a team atmosphere. You're going to have come fun and work for the summer. recruit better, find different ways to find these people going to job fairs, going to Cape Cod Community College, going to colleges. And that's on us, that we have to do a better job and just change it up. So, I mean, you can get people in and it doesn't have to be the highest amount of money. Obviously, it can't be the lowest, but if we're in the middle, and I think if we can be a little bit more creative and just better ourselves going out there, it's the biggest thing that I think we need to do better as a department.
Yeah, and just one of the things that my concern is, I believe I read in the paper about some towns, I don't remember which ones, I don't remember if it was this town, but that some towns, because of the worker shortage, because of the challenges exactly that you just described, had to not have lifeguards at some beaches, or reduce the hours that they were available, et cetera. So, I see this as being a trend that we're going to continue to have to grapple with, right? So my question is just wondering if there's a way of kind of pooling resources, perhaps using the county as a, fund holder or something like that, to really kind of figure out, which beaches across the Cape really get the most, need the most, or most family friendly, you need the most lifeguards at, et cetera. If there's been any thoughts about anything like that.
It hasn't been discussed, it's something that could be brought up. I don't know, how that would work, just for different municipalities wise. I think a lot of towns would be like, well, our beaches are the important ones with that. But I don't think maybe something down the line, that is something I would look at. And the biggest thing too, even though we're surrounded by, water, there's no pools on the Cape, there's no swim teams, things like that, right? So, and that's all been discussed as everyone, it's pooling together to offer these classes at the few pools that we have. So there is collaboration in regards to that, to be able to try and get these kids certified, and these college kids, and offering classes, and finding these places where we can do this, and getting swimming like bigger here, even though we're at the beach. So there's things like that we've collaborated with, and I'm sure, as you say, this trend has been happening for a while, and I think that collaboration is going to have to continue to happen to really help the situation down the line.
I just want to recognize that I know there's been a couple of comments in the chat, and just under open meeting law, we can't be typing back any responses, but I will call on anyone or ask any questions that I see pop up. And then the last question was just something that had previously come up about fees as far as students within the DY school system that are residents of Dennis. If there's anything comparable happening on the other side of the river. That we could
So you're talking the sailing, correct?
I believe that was the
Yeah.
question that was raised at.
So everyone has to pay for our sailing program. I don't know if there was confusion. I know DY has a sailing club that uses our sailing facility and boats in the spring. But our sailing program that we run during the summer, everyone has to pay. And in fact, Dennis has to pay out of, they have to pay non-resident rates. So we have Yarmouth resident rates, and then Dennis would have to pay the non-resident. So for the sailing, the DY school uses it, just kind of like we use their facilities. It's one of those kind of quid pro quos trying to work together. But for our specific sailing program, everyone has to pay for that.
Robert, did you want to follow up on that at all? I know
Yes,
that was a concern of yours.
thank you. The concept was different. It was everything Yarmouth does with DY, we pay our fair share, whether it's 70%, 72%, whatever the percent is. When DY uses a town property that is 100% funded through town taxes through the recreation department, DY should be funding a percentage to offset those costs to our town and our taxpayers. That's the concept I was working with. That when we use a DY field in recreation, we are paying 72% of that field already. But when DY, the school comes and uses an asset specifically owned by the town of Yarmouth, the school should compensate. It's just an offset. We could do it as an offset, but there should be some type of offset.
Okay, thanks for explaining that perspective. And I appreciate you offering that. Amy or Bob, did you have any comment on that or? Okay.
I mean, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how that all works in regards to like who owns what as a town. I mean, I know that we, like right now, we're in their gyms and we don't pay to use their gyms right now. So I don't know. So sometimes they use our fields. We just try and work together. I know if it was an outside group, like if there's travel basketball that isn't associated with us right now, like they have to pay to use the schools. We don't, because we're a town, we're another fellow town department using them. So.
And Dennis does something similar, right? When DY needs to use one of their facilities, they're not necessarily charging them for that.
Yeah, I can't speak for Dennis. I don't know what they do. Because they are recreation wise a separate municipality entity. So I don't know what DY uses over in Dennis.
Maybe something to research. Robert, did you have any other questions?
Well, only that I think that's the point, which is we don't know of any other exchange that's like that. And again, I take the job as being fiduciary responsibility to the townspeople. And the average person here, like Robert talked about it, because we have big asset values, we're perceived wealthy, but our average person's only making in the $40,000 range. That we should defend our assets and make people pay when they use them. That's all. And like, again, we talked about this thing, you and I don't want to beat it, but if we use a DY product, we pay 70%. We pay our fair share already. If there's an asset over here, I'd like to see them chip in. I'll give you a perfect example. We just chipped in for the housing for the veterans. Why shouldn't they chip in for repairs and stuff like that over to the rec? They share the use, that type of mentality. But thank you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And Amy, thank you for answering those questions. Does anyone else have any questions of Amy before she goes off to her program that she needs to be at?
I have one question.
Go ahead. Amy.
If you raise the beach fees slightly, will that help you?
We don't receive the beach fees. That is part of DPW. So I'm sure it would help them. I mean, I will say
Right.
Yarmouth is one of the lower beach fees. So I think that's something the town could look at. I mean, when our two sister towns are 25 and 25, I believe, and then Dennis is 30 on the weekend. So I think in the future years, I think that's certainly something Yarmouth could look at raising, when trying to collect some of these.
So even though you supply lifeguards, you don't get any money out of the beach fees?
No, because the lifeguards are funded by the general fund. So.
Thank you.
Amy, I know that you might need to do some research on this or have conversations with fellow rec directors, but is that similar in other towns where DPW gets the fees for beach stickers? Or is it unique to us?
Well, it's funny, actually, most towns for the rec department, their rec department's in control of the booth attendants. So the rec department does do all that. So that would go to fund the lifeguards and the booth attendants and stuff. Not all of them, but I do know a lot of rec departments kind of control that whole aspect. Not something saying something I can take on right now as one person to take on the booth attendants, but I think with that is Parks and Rec used to be together under one department here before my time. And so I think when they split, a lot of, it was like, who's taking what, from my understanding. And so that's kind of where we're at. And that was before I got here. And so I think that things were just, taken, and that's where we're at. I mean, we work super closely with the Parks Department anyways, but they're, we're not together officially anymore. We're broken up, so.
George, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think just speaks to the fact that we probably should look into doing that. It's arbitrarily divided right now. You're suggesting a need for revenue. You're already admitting that our revenue for beach access is lower than everything else. So why don't we look into that and you can get back to
Just
us.
so everyone knows that the Parks doesn't keep those revenues, that it goes into, it's actually on that sheet of the local estimated revenues,
Right.
those receipts, that 28%. It goes in there and then the funds go back out to the recreation department. I think that, the Parks manages the sticker program, but they don't keep the money.
No, my only point is, this sounds like an obvious user fee. And if we're already, cheaper than everybody else, why not raise a little bit more revenue and then, we get to allocate it as a town to wherever we choose to allocate it.
It's an interesting idea to explore. All right. Well, thank you again, Amy. Appreciate it. We'll let you go unless
Thank you
anyone
very
else has
much.
any last questions. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Madam Chair, if you want to go back to questions for Bob and things like that, I appreciate the interlude for recreation so she can get to her program.
Sure. Let's open it back up to committee members for questions for Bob. Robert?
Well, George had his hand up first.
Oh, George, go ahead.
Just a quick comment more than anything, but on the local estimated receipts chart and the state thing, your message there was stability. Things are not volatile as the picture conveys. And that's just a function of, what's on your dependent variable axis of the graph. So maybe in presenting that to the public anyways, we essentially change that axis so that that seeming volatility disappears. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And, you could put them all on the same graph and like the smaller amounts, like the state aid, would be imperceptible. But I sort of did them like that on purpose so that I could,
Okay.
what I like to do is break them down individually and show some of the details of each individual revenue source. But clearly, your point is extremely well taken. If you put them all on the same axis, what you see is the picture is much flatter.
Right.
It's, very slow growth. It winds up looking like, the property tax, that's the big number. So,
Right, exactly.
so that axis will color everything. So that's what it looks like when you do that. I've done that. It's very, similar looking to the property tax one.
I'm just saying the message was stability. The picture says volatility. And,
Right.
And you
But it
spent,
is fascinating to me. When you get into the individual, it's like a separate battle with each tiny revenue source. And even when you get into the non-property tax, the motor vehicle excise world is a completely different world than the licenses and permits and the recreation fees. It's fascinating. You have to really break them right down.
and in the end, we're really looking at a portfolio of revenues. And we're concerned about what the aggregate is, not what the individual pieces are. It'd be nice to explain them, be able to explain them if they are changing, but in the end, we're worried about what the portfolio is providing us to fund the town.
Robert, did you want to jump in?
Yes, Robert, it'd be nice if on the real estate tax section, if you could shadow commercial from residential, because, and I think most of us agree that the lack of commercial real estate in here is hurting our stability financially as a town. We were 15%, we're down to 3%. For some reason, the negativity towards commercial development fostered through the town for the last 10 years. And we saw it all drop off. Now with sewer coming, with $160 million in the sewer system, we have to have people using that sewer system. So I think that's one of the issues. And we also have the town also has been a very not received well ideas, like Ed wanted to sell off some properties and some lands that were put back on the tax revenue. They didn't like that idea. And I know we've shut down marijuana, which again, I think that's crazy only because it's on both sides of us and people are making money. These type of ideas, I think we're gonna have to foster, because the math you show me cannot be sustained. You know what I mean? The insurances and that type of stuff are growing faster than 2.5% allows, which means we're eating our own. That's why we don't have the roadways in there now, because we had to pull them out. We had to pull out capital, right, in order to balance the budget. And that's because these other things are not keeping pace with 2.5%. They're excessive. So that's all. It would be. Could you show that as a grade area? Because I think it would accentuate how small with money we get from that.
Yeah, and you know, what's interesting is I went back and looked at that, and we could certainly put that on a graph, but what's fascinating to me is that I don't have the numbers in front of me now, but if I recall, I looked at the split between commercial and residential, and it was 90-10. And I had heard that, you know, the anecdotes, it used to be, you know, 20% and it went down to 5%. And, you know, you go back 20 years and you look at it, it was 90-10. And I haven't really seen a shift between lowering commercial values and raising residential values. But let's look at the data and see what it bears. And I think that one of the great hopes that we have is, don't forget, you know, the Collins Center study that we've been using. It was, you know, done in 2018, so it's still, you know, relatively fresh. Pointed to the with increased infrastructure for wastewater, that there could be $100 million growth in property values, largely in the commercial range. So if it's possible to impact that you know, 90-10 and make it 80-20, that would be a good thing. So your point is extremely well taken. And I hope those, I haven't seen all the new body art places, and I'm waiting for them to come up, and you know, maybe a couple of brew pubs now that we've approved those. So at least it looks like we're moving a little bit in the right direction. Of course, haven't got those cigarettes squared away.
When the new steel comes out, Robert, we're all getting tattoos, so I'll give you a buzz and we'll go over and get them.
I'll get one with you. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think just in general, at the beginning of the fiscal year, it's helpful to have just an overall kind of trend of where we're going. I also agree with George that it would be, I love the way that you have broken things out, but I think it would also be helpful to have those combined numbers on one sheet. And I also think it would be helpful to have expenses on that same sheet as well, so that we really can see where is the delta getting smaller, which I assume that it is. And, you know, I think the other piece to that is projections. So it seemed like we had a little bit of sort of some projections of how we were going to grow in terms of revenues. But, you know, getting some sense of how we're going to grow in terms of expenses. Certainly, you know, we know health insurance, OPEB, et cetera. But, you know, if there are any kind of, you know, analyses that have been done, I think, you know, by DOR or by Mass Municipal or whatever else, that can kind of help in the committee have a bigger picture of what's coming. And as Robert said, kind of, you know, when we get to that point of, you know, the costs, well, I think we get to that point quite often, but of costs just, you know, exceeding revenues in an insurmountable way, what, you know, where are we coming and what are our plans? I think that really informs the bigger picture of what this committee needs to be looking at. Other questions for Bob?
I just want to make a comment, Bob. First of all, thank you for putting this overview together. It, it was very helpful for me to see the big picture, especially before we start. It's the first one I've seen since I've been on the committee for a couple of years. So this was very helpful. Thank you. And I'm sure my colleagues on the committee agree.
I absolutely agree. One other question that I had, Bob, was you mentioned that it's healthy to stay within 90% and only have about 10% being off when it comes to estimates versus actuals. One thing that I wasn't clear on is, aside from COVID, so taking out the last 2 years, how have we done with that generally? Have we been inside or outside that 10%?
Okay, I'd say that 10% has been pretty standard, and it has grown in recent years.
Okay, it's grown to beyond 10% in recent years.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it makes sense to get us out of the habit of relying on free cash for as much as we do. There were a couple other questions that I had sent along. I'm not sure if you got a chance to take a look at them. They just were sort of some big picture questions about, like there was, I noticed that OPEB contributions in at least a couple of the budgets that I looked at seemed to be down. And I just wondered if you could just comment on that. That was just sort of.
Okay, well, first of all, that was one area I probably should have listed on my chart. Last year, we suspended a number of the OPEB contributions in the non-enterprise fund. So I think, that was another area where we've gone back in and restored those OPEB contributions. And one of the things that we have now is an updated actuarial analysis that shows, from the town's previous contributions, we've got, the new rates that calculate out slightly less required each year from each department. And those are netted from the health insurance for retirees, which is a pay-as-you-go basis. So, but it's based on the newest actuarial analysis. And the town is making progress. You'll see, I don't have it directly in front of me, but there's a pretty healthy balance right now in the OPEB trust fund. And by restoring these OPEB, contributions from each cost center, that'll help build that up even more. And the more that goes in there, when they do the new actuarial analysis, we get to take advantage of, a better prime rate that the investments that we have are calculated out in the actuarial. And so it lowers the overall unfunded liability. So what you find is the more that you put in your trust fund, the better more easier it is to maintain those, they call it the minimum annual required contribution.
Okay. Thank you for that reminder of what we did a year ago seems so far away. Any other questions for Bob? Bob, thank you very much for coming in and presenting to us. I completely agree with George. This is a great picture. I would love to make it a regular part of our budgeting process. Might even be able to touch bases on this type of stuff mid-year. And I do think that, given kind of the timing of the budget books getting done, we might need to assemble more questions for you and have you come back at some point. So appreciate your willingness to do that.
I'll be here throughout, so
Great.
You won't get rid of me.
Awesome.
But thank you very much. Appreciate
Happy
it.
to have you. Thank you. Okay, what do we have next?
Next one, Madam Chair, would be the Senior Center, Diane Kane, and I can share screen for her presentation.
Great. Welcome, Diane.
Chair and Finance Committee members, I'm Diane Kane, Director of Senior Services. The mission of the Town of Yarmouth's Division of Senior Services is to foster an age-friendly community that enhances the quality of life for the town's older adults ages 60 and above and their families by providing programs and services in a supportive and accessible environment that contributes to vital aging through mental, physical, and financial wellness. A recap of the year includes that we were able to operate under budget for the year. We transitioned from a closed building to a full service to the public seamlessly. We're advocating for services, programs, and transportation for elders in our community. We provided programs to 11,117 residents. We provided transportation to over 1,000 residents since July. We built a list of homebound residents and are continuing to build on this. Milestones is our newsletter. It was mailed out to approximately 30,000 people and emailed to 16,800 for a total of 46,800. We provided vaccines to homebound residents with the help of the health department and the fire department. We organized Christmas dinner lists for the homebound. Through Yarmouth Connects, we provided over 14,000 homebound elders and nursing home residents with cards and gifts throughout the year. 540 lunches were served through Elder Services since October. They have just closed down temporarily due to COVID on Monday. So we organized 358 residents to have their taxes prepared through AARP. We provided several hundred elders with medical equipment. So right now for our budget, in 2022, our actual is 414,519. And we're proposing to go to 465,664, with the difference being we just hired on a full-time administrative assistant. The reason why you're seeing a difference in the salary from 2021 to 2022 was because this salary for our department came out of the EOEA grant. So that's that in a nutshell. The expenses virtually are remaining the same. I think there's a $3,000 increase there. So the salary staffing, like I said, it was an internal transfer for our administrative assistant position. We had $50,000 in there. So this transfer with the $50,000 is right on target. There are no increases to expenses. Challenges facing senior services is loneliness and isolation right now. We have food insecurity that we're concerned about. We are operating at 60% since coming back from the pandemic. Our transportation services gradually has come back to pre-pandemic levels, with many of our trips being healthcare related. We are continuing to provide programs during this challenging circumstances. And for retention, we need to offer competitive wages for part-time staff, and they should be included in raises for both COLA and merit, as they are vitally important to our center. So recommendations for addressing future challenges. We want to increase participation in programs and services that our seniors want most, as indicated by the Yarmouth Senior Center survey, which was just put out over the last summer. And we got our results in the fall. We have loneliness and isolation. So we created a social outing club that we were hoping to kick off in January. However, with COVID right now, we're not exactly sure if that will go off or not. But we are planning on that for the future. Continuing to build relationships through our reassurance calls, continuing with Yarmouth Connects to provide homebound and nursing home residents assistance through card and letter writing campaigns that are mostly put on through the public. For food insecurity, we are getting this funded by CDBG grant funding and community partnership through the Family Table Collaborative and some churches, local churches. And we're going to be discussing with HR to have a part-time put into our performance review process. So some questions do you want me to just go into the questions that you had sent? Or would you like to ask me some other various questions?
That's a good place to start.
So you had asked me about regarding the new programs, which would you like to do with this fiscal year, or are you planning on creating all of them this year? So we're sprinkling them in as we go along, and we don't anticipate any of that to be coming out of our budget. Regarding the list of vulnerable seniors in the event of a catastrophe, to what degree are we collaborating with the Barnstable County? So I have planned on reaching out to Chief Simonian and to Sean O'Brien by week's end. Sean O'Brien's from the emergency command for the county. Regarding educating homebound and seniors on tech and connectivity, we were moving forward with this endeavor prior to the pandemic. We were making good strides, but with the pandemic, we could not go into the houses of the homebound. So, and then we found out that when we came back and we opened up again, that students were not allowed to come over here because they weren't fully vaccinated. So it's kind of threw a monkey wrench to our progress, but we expect to pick that back up again when we can do so. And then we have also taken steps towards a virtual senior center with one of our instructors has gone down to Florida for the winter. So we've Zoomed her class to her down in Florida through our ballroom. So her class can still meet for the camaraderie and the talking, socialization. They don't have to have tech at home, so they can come here still and enjoy the camaraderie of her classes. Regarding revenue streams, we had wanted to do a fitness path and build into the fitness path some equipment that we would be trying out for CPC funding. And then the walkway that I had spoke of would not be eligible for CPC funding. So we're planning on looking into other grant sources for that. As far as salaries, what I'm looking to do is to get the part-time staff to be recognized through the performance review process and get them merit raises and possibly COLA raises as well. Our part-time staff right now has been with us for a very long time, and they're dedicated to their work. Right now we have a part-time staff member that is not making minimum wage. So because minimum wage just changed, she's kind of right on that cusp a little bit. And with Stop and Shop paying $18 to $20 an hour, it's making it really difficult for us. So we'd like to have that looked at as well. So
Quick follow up on that for Bob or Bill is what she's talking about in terms of having part-time people have the merit pay and review something that is happening in other departments? Or would it be unique to the senior center? Bill, you're on mute.
Yeah, I don't think that part-time employees have a review process, so it might be unique to the senior center, but I will check that out.
Thanks.
Yeah, right now they're considered seasonal part-time work. So they're kind of like in that lost category, but they are vital to our success here at the senior center.
If I may, just clarification. I think each department head is, working with their part-timers and reviewing them in the sense that they're motivating them to perform. I don't think that there's a merit-based system for them, which is what Diane had indicated, which is related to the review process.
And they're reviewed by the personnel board. So, it's the same issue with the lifeguards. They're seasonal people. They don't get merit. And if you wait and wait, then all of the other towns around you increase and you stay the same. And so I know that there's been a lot of work for some of the temporary seasonal positions that the personnel board is studying them. So Diane, the best thing to do is to work with us and work with Sarah to, if there's a proposal to, it's not the same merit system as the salaried people that are full-time get, but there certainly can be, and there are ongoing studies and upgrades for the temporary seasonal positions. It's, they don't grow as fast as the full-timers.
And just to clarify, Diane, are the folks that you're talking about actually seasonal, or are they classified as such?
They're classified as seasonal, but they are part-time workers here. A lot of them have been here
Year-round.
for 10 years.
But they're there year round.
Yeah, they're here year-round.
Yeah, so it sounds almost like a classification issue. Okay, thank you. That's all of my questions. Any other questions from members of the committee? Nobody? All right, Diane, thank you so much for your time. But I'm sorry, George.
Well, I just think one more time, it's been pointed out to us that in this very difficult labor market, when we are hiring an awful lot of part-time people, we really give our service providers in the town a challenge to not be able to provide those services because they either have to find funding for a full-time job or, flexibility would help here, I guess is what I'm getting at. However we do that, I'll leave it to the, human resource professionals, but more flexibility than we have seems necessary. And as Bob said, sounds like we should be having the personnel committee address that.
We might want to think about a year-round part-time classification, which seems to be what those people fit in versus the seasonal classification.
Yeah, that might be something worth exploring. I know technically the chair is the representative to the personnel board. But my understanding is there wasn't necessarily an expectation that I was going to do it, but Brian will probably do it when he comes back. But is there someone on staff who could maybe look into that a little bit?
I jump in?
Sure, Jane.
Hi, Diane. It's a little bit similar to the number of part-time folks we have at the library who work year-round, and some of them were considered seasonal because they used to only do some Sunday hours in the fall. But I could work with Diane, and I can help her, move it into that direction. Because I'm sure Sarah would be amenable to it. Those folks get a COLA increase each year.
It sounds to me like this is an administrative problem that something is too rigid in the wrong places, and we should be able to address that.
Agreed.
As reasonable people.
Minimum wage is barely a living wage, right?
No, it's not a living wage. Not on the Cape. Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to take a look into that and see if this is something that exists across departments, and if so, it might be worth having a reclassification. Any other questions or comments for Diane? Well, we thank you for your time, and we thank you for hosting us when we came by sometime last year, months ago, to tour the facility and see the capital needs that you have. Really appreciated you showing us around. Thank you. It was very helpful.
Putting a face to everybody too.
Yeah, well, I mean, also just seeing, the leaky roof above the entrance and all that sort of stuff it's helpful. Thank you.
Madam Chair, the next one is Jane Kane in the library.
Well, she's
Right.
already on camera, so we're ready to go, Jane.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's nice to see everybody, even if it's virtual. Let's get through this really quickly. The library division has the mission, of course, to provide assistance in providing informational, educational, cultural, experiential improvement to the community through verifiable, reliable, and up-to-date information resources. We want to see our community as a strong readership community, and we promote lifelong learning, of course.
Sorry. Moving down.
Ready when you are.
Yep.
So to recap the past year, it seems like it's still 2021. We had another year of restricted programming. We went back to our full hours on June 1st. We had been working under reduced hours throughout most of the winter. And then when right after Memorial Day, we went back to resuming our full hours at both locations of South and West. We have continued to provide throughout the 2 years of this pandemic remote services. We've increased a lot of interactions with our patrons through Zoom. We have story time and author events that we've been doing remotely, virtually. The story time plan right now has been every week we've had pre-recorded story times that folks can watch on YouTube at their convenience. So that's been working out really well. It involves 3 or 4 stories and then a craft, just like real story time. We've continued our curbside deliveries for folks who still don't want to come into the building or prefer the convenience of curbside. And we've increased our outreach delivery capabilities so that folks can get materials without leaving their home. What we've noticed is that it's very wonderful to have great outdoor space. So we've had events on the front lawn at West Yarmouth Library, and the South Yarmouth Library Association provided us with a beautiful kind of, I think it's kind of a classic design gazebo. The Dennis Yarmouth Newcomers Club, the carpentry group, put together a really nice deck that gazebo sits on. It got built just in time for the fall, so we've been using it for a few programs, but we greatly look forward to good weather in the spring and the summer and having different events out there, whether they're literary events or cultural events. And so outdoor space is an important thing, especially in beautiful Cape Cod. This past year, I worked with Sarah O'Reilly in the Human Resources Department and the Personnel Board. Hi, Sharon, it's good to see you, or see your name. To adjust 4 of the library positions that exist here and to make them a more appropriate grade level. We can talk about that a little bit later because it comes up on another slide. But those are the highlights of my past year. Plus, I've been reading a lot of good books. So our fiscal year 2023 request is a little bit larger in the salary area, which is due, of course, to cost of living and merit increases that will be in existence. Our expense lines are relatively similar to how they are this year. The biggest change I think you'll notice is that we've increased our materials line to accommodate a standard set by the state that requires your material line to be a certain percentage of your bottom line appropriation. And so that's how that figure has changed in our expenses.
So just to clarify something, Jane, so
Certainly.
the salary is well, you have it on the slide right there. There's no actual new personnel that you're asking for.
Correct. We're
Great.
actually in the process of bringing on board 2 on-call substitutes. Those are positions that are graded and rated the same as our part-time library assistants who work year-round. These on-call substitutes, let's see, the interview process started about 3 months ago, and they should be starting within the next couple of weeks. it ranges from no hours per week to up to 12 or 13, sometimes as high as 19 hours per week, depending on our staffing needs.
Thank you.
So in the salary staffing area, as I mentioned, 4 individuals got new classifications in their grade level. So 2 of our staff librarians were reclassified as supervisors in their sections here at the library. So that was a nice bump and a nice acknowledgement of the additional responsibilities that those folks have been doing for years. And then 2 other individuals who were considered senior library assistants were brought up to the level of staff librarians. So again, it's a nice bump. I have both of those people who just became staff librarians. One just got a master's degree in library science, and the other one is just starting a master's program. So it's a nice acknowledgement of their commitment to our profession. In addition, the other increases are that 2% cost of living adjustment, which we just went through like over the past 2 to 4 weeks that have been challenging from an accounting standpoint. And then there were step revisions. There are step revisions in this new contractual agreement for next fiscal year that have made the numbers a little bit bigger for the employees here. I'm pleased with it, actually. And then I explained to you that we adjusted our materials line, and I can give you more specific information about that if you need it, but it's gone from about 90,000 to about 126,000 for materials. Oh, we're already at the challenges of life here at the library. So our planning committee, our library planning committee, and our staff, and a number of folks who are volunteers here at the library who work with us in a number of different capacities are well aware of the inadequate space here at the library. I think the pandemic has kind of brought it out as well. You know, we have low ceilings, we have narrow hallways, we have a lack of sinks and a lack of restroom facilities when you think about hygiene and things like that, that we've all been thinking about for the past almost 2 years of a pandemic. So we know that the layout of the library is important, and that's a challenge in both locations, whether it's south or it's west. Other challenges are communicating the myriad changes that have come through over the past 20 months or so to the public, making sure that all of our staff are aware. We have a lot of part-time folks, so communication, even internal communication, is a challenge, but then making that information understandable and clear to the public is a challenge. Programming has been a real challenge due to the fact that it requires technology skills, and it requires your audience to want to sit through a program on Zoom versus being in a room where they can chat with their neighbors while they're listening to an author talk, that sort of thing. So programming has been a challenge. We realized we needed to boost our Wi-Fi capabilities in the basement here at South. We've, it's always something in terms of setting up programs in a virtual environment. Although we have quite a little bit of a green room now downstairs in the Leonard room. We haven't had public meetings. We haven't had the public in for meetings or anything like that. So we've turned that room more or less into a storage area, as well as the green room where all the audio visual and the lights and the cameras and the action happen. So that's kind of interesting. That's a nice transition in technology, but it's still been a challenge. And then I still have a couple of staff who are working remotely part-time due to a variety of reasons. And then in addition to all that, I mean, it's just been a year of a bit of stress when it comes to trying to be flexible, but trying to be realistic and trying to keep everybody safe and healthy. So those are the challenges that I can think of.
Great. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to rush you, but looking at the time, we're starting to get into a little bit of a crunch.
Okay. So these are easy. Recommendations to improve, it would be a space and an HVAC improvement upgrades, things like that. Some of those are on our capital request in terms of improvements to the systems and things like that. We're looking for community input this year as we continue to plan, whether it's our strategic plan or it is a plan for facilities and services in the future. So what is working and what is not? We're thinking about a survey. We're thinking about information sessions, especially the library planning committee, who's been very involved with looking to the future. And we're encouraging support for change here. We need a tech savvy and creative staff. We do have a wonderful tech savvy and creative staff. We just need to keep that up. And then we need public relations and communications specializations in these trying times. That's what I got. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Jane. Members of the committee, questions for Jane? George?
I have two, Jane. First of all, who's responsible for lifelong learning in Yarmouth?
Well, for free, you can get it done at the public library. Lifelong learning is Cape-wide, focused at the college. But lifelong learning is what we do here. We take an individual from infancy to maturity and provide them with cultural enrichment, education, information sources, lectures, things like that.
So there's no other town department that has that responsibility.
Diane does a ton of it at the Senior Center through her programs.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a sense. And all right, the other question has to do with the planning. I've spent the last 40 years seeing transitions in what libraries are. And, places that I've worked have now emphasized the word information, and the word library has disappeared. And I can even see in terms of the physical structures that they are building or modifying, there's a clear emphasis on we don't need brick and mortar as much as we need technological access and that sort of thing. But so I guess my question is the planning committee using some outside consultant to advise them in this, or do you have the resource inherent in your committee for understanding where where librarians see, or at least information technology people see this going?
Pretty much when we talk about professional development and how our staff looks to the future in terms of what their responsibilities are and what their capabilities are, that's self-reliant. So we attend conferences, we go to, now we're doing a lot of Zoom training and things like that to keep in touch with what's going on statewide, nationwide, and worldwide. But I think your question is talking about the physical structure of the buildings and whether or not it's important to still have a place to go that's called the library. And that's what our planning committee studies all the time. They talk about the uses of a library. Bill, you and I even talked about this when we were meeting with you kind of as a meet and greet. There's a need for community gathering. There's a need for folks to have a place to go where they can learn and not be judged, learn and not be charged a fee, learn and have access to the internet and access to all the wonderful databases that the Boston Public Library has, the Chicago Public Library has, the Library of Congress has, and the whole world has. So I'm kind of like going around in circles, but the point is that that's what the study committee has been talking about. That's what my professional staff works on in terms of keeping in touch with standards. We have journals that we read and things like that. And I think we see a future that's pretty promising in terms of a need for a library and a place for people to go, whether they want to have a conversation circle if they speak a foreign language and they're trying to learn English, or they want to have a parents circle or a mother's group that meets on a regular basis. That's community enrichment in the finest way. And I think the library is one of the great places to do that.
I think the point I was trying to sneak in there was hopefully we don't move towards the position that, oh, we can all do this with technology. Because I do agree that developing technological skills are important and that, exploiting them. But second of all, I think we need a place to come together for certain things. And more importantly, human expertise to conduct and actually be proactive in creating those opportunities. And so that's as important as the building, which may be repurposed anyway.
It is. And that's one of our challenges. I mean, I can tell you, we do have a lot of part-time individuals. We also have full-time folks, but they're mostly at the front desk. I envision a library that has departments with a number of professionals who focus on their specialties and can bring those services to the public. We are a bare bones organization, if you believe it or not, we are. And it would be nice if we had, more folks who are in that whatever expert category. We rely on our staff and we're proud and pleased with their performance. We rely on volunteers. We rely on authors who come and talk for free, or lecturers or historians and things like that. We work with the Historical Society. We work with the Cultural Center. We are building some collaborative efforts in making sure Yarmouth is enriched as much as it can be.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that, and it's just a comment, maybe something to think about. I remember talking to, I don't know if he's still the chair, but Will Rubenstein about kind of the future of the library and envisioning that. And just, one of the thoughts that I have for, Bob and Bill is thinking about, the future of services, town buildings, properties. I think there could be a tremendous value in putting a lot of the services that we currently have siloed under one roof or under a couple of roofs, but together, such as maybe even the senior center, in 20 or 30 years, and the library, and even town hall. I mean, there's the state police barracks right next to town hall. If that gets moved at some point, which I've heard rumor that there's talk of doing that, is that something that we could get from the state, have a big campus, and then we could be bringing people in more when it comes to engaging with town services across the board, and have kind of a meeting and gathering place, and potentially a village center that we could build out from that on the commercial space where there's coffee shops and other stuff. Just things to kind of be thinking about holistically, because I know I personally would be more likely to go into, I tend to just like buy my books, which is economically not that smart, but I would be more likely to go into the library if it was in town hall, or if I was going there for other reasons and just pop my head in. So that's just a comment. Any other questions or comments for Jane?
Stephanie, that's definitely what we've been looking at in the planning committee, library planning committee. We've been talking to the land disposition folks, the housing folks, town administration, the senior center, and we've not narrowed down anything, but I didn't know that state barracks was potentially in transition.
Potentially,
but
very
that's
potentially.
That's a great location.
Yeah. And there's the school across the street that we've leased to Bridgewater, but I don't know how, what the future of that is either. So, just we have potential opportunities. So
each of those old buildings, however, have their challenges in their foundation and the ability to bear the weight of a library collection.
Yeah,
I know that they had considered it maybe 10 years ago, that building.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jane.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks,
The next one was scheduled to be golf, but golf asked to be flipped with the DNR Division of Natural Resources. So I'm going to post the DNR presentation, and Carl Von Ohm will be is available.
Take it away, Carl.
Thank you. Good to see everybody this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carl Von Hoen. I'm the Director of the Division of Natural Resources here in the town of Yarmouth. I've been labeled someone that puts a lot of information out there and talks a lot and drags meetings on. I promise not to do that. And I'll wrap this up by saying thank you for your continued support. So anyways, getting back on track, Division of Natural Resources protects, preserves, promotes, manages the natural resources, waters, and wild animal resources of the town of Yarmouth, and ensures public safety for all residents and visitors alike that utilize the resources year-round through education and enforcement of local, state, and federal environmental, maritime, and domestic laws. Next, please. That is a very short mission statement that we do have, but it needed to fit on one slide and be readable. Highlights that we've seen this year. We're seeing the winding down of the Parkers River Route 28 bridge replacement that has been a long time coming and something I started pushing back in 1996. So some of these big projects do take a long time, as well as the dam at the Baxter Mill and the reestablishment of the Fishway at that location. I'm hoping this spring that we do transplant some herring to that run to get that reestablished. We've been doing a good amount of land management through grant programs for prescribed burns, mechanical means. We've done a good amount of habitat restoration within our estuaries, but more importantly, and something more notable, through grant funding and working with different entities, including the U.S. Coast Guard, we have been growing the Yarmouth Fish Reef, which provides more habitat for ground fish, as well as resources for recreational and commercial fishing ventures. We have expanded slightly within our budgetary means, our oyster fishery, which we've reestablished only a couple of years ago after about 30 years of not having an oyster fishery at all. We have, through our grants through Clean Vessel Act, we have pumped out nearly 4,000 gallons of marine waste this year. Unfortunately, I did not have a chance to update this slide because that figure was just tallied late this afternoon. That all goes into our looking at our water quality issues, and more we can do on these sides. Potentially, maybe it's less that we need to do on the sewering and wastewater needs. We continue community outreach on everything from wastewater to sharks to shellfish to wildlife to coastal issues to global warming. The list continues on and on and on. The number of our waterways and terrestrial calls for emergencies and services have increased. We saw a tremendous increase last year with the pandemic, with the number of people at home and out and about, social distancing. We've seen more new boats sold and purchased and new boaters on our waterways, which have inherent issues with that. But our numbers have increased again this year from last year. And also a new emerging for many people, you're seeing cyanobacteria coming into the newspaper, and one of those issues for high nutrient freshwater bodies, at least here on Cape. Other places, there are varieties of blue-green algae that are saltwater as well, but freshwater, which is something that many towns are just starting to have issues with. And we're seeing it spread from pond to pond. This year, unfortunately, was the first year we've seen any cyano detection. And unfortunately, it was in Long Pond this summer. Very unique weather, water issues, and all of that this year. But we are very concerned on that. And and really need to continue to get a better grip on it. Next, please. As you can see, our budgets have been relatively consistent. We are seeing a little bit of an increase under salaries under the contractual agreement, and a slight increase in the expenses. As Bob mentioned in his presentation, there are some line items that have gone up in some of the budgets. Next slide, please. And those areas are, of course, as Bob said, vehicle maintenance, professional technical repair, shellfish propagation, boat supplies, just under $7,000 in total. This is the first increase in expenses that we've seen in over 10 years at this point. Next slide, please. Challenge that are facing the department and the town from the environmental side of things, the continual increase in services, not just law enforcement or search and rescue, but the demands that are being placed on the department scientifically, and maintaining our lands and our shorelines and waterfronts. And a lot of that are increases in federal and state mandates and standards. Vibrio, which is an oyster disease. There's a whole new federal protocol under food and drug that require us to maintain and log and inspect at a whole new level, requiring more staff time and resources. And of course, as you saw with the increase in some of the line items under expenses, the cost of services and supplies, we're all seeing it at home. We're seeing it at the town as well. We're just not going up in turn. Pieces of equipment will wait to be serviced until a new budget comes around, or we start whittling down on how much we are doing, because of not having the funding to repair boats or vehicles or whatever it might be. The other is continued approach to a lot of our bigger price tag projects, including coastal structures. And, we are looking at that. I unfortunately have been trying to push this for many, many years. I'm thrilled that Bob and Bill are really behind us to try to get into a program to actually get some of these projects done. We will be entering the MVP program. We're looking for some funding this year to go through and reprioritize and reevaluate some of the top priorities, so that will get us in line for some additional grant funding going down the road. Of course, seasonal full-time wages are hindering recruitment, as you're hearing from all the departments. State and federal permitting for a lot of our projects, there's review delays, permitting delays, as their staffing levels have gone down and inexperienced people are coming into those positions that they're just not able to push through the projects as quickly. Our dredging programs, of course, the county dredge gives us a great value to our dredging. However, they do have limitations. There's 15 communities that are trying to utilize the county dredge. And then we have permitting delays and all those things. So it all goes hand in hand together with some of our challenges in managing our waterways. Shoreline erosion, of course, continues. We try to combat that with our beach nourishment program through the dredging to maintain. We have approximately 32 nourishment sites along our shorelines that we maintain with sand placement from our dredging projects. So we're trying to keep up with that. But as we're seeing some of these more severe storms happening on some of these astronomical tides and sea level rise, around the corner, we have our challenges to keep up with that. And then, as I stated, with cyanobacteria, the spread of some of these algae, as well as marine algae, that we're seeing that are smothering out some of our habitat that we're hopefully going to get better handle on once we start addressing the wastewater issue. Next slide, please. And the recommendations, these all seem to be reoccurring with most of the departments, looking at increasing staffing levels to try to keep up with the work and allow us to be more proactive than reactive in a lot of the work that we are doing. The funding mechanism, as I already went over, for example, the coastal infrastructures, dredging and shoreline erosion. There are some grants out there. We're always applying for grants. The competition is high. A lot of the coastal monies seem to be going to the bigger port communities of Boston, Gloucester, New Bedford. Here on Cape Cod, we do get a little bit down here, but it is difficult to pull that in. We've been successful in past years and will continue to move forward with that. And then, of course, the implementation of the wastewater plan moving forward to try to address the nitrogen and phosphorus issues that we have in both fresh and salt water. That way we can start to promote and advance some of our shellfish propagations, clean up the water bodies, hopefully take a rest on potentially some of these other invasive algae that are coming in, some toxic like cyano, that we'll see a relief on that, hopefully in the future. Next slide, please. And bring us to the end. Hopefully that was quick enough. Thank you for your continued support. And I'll entertain any questions that there might be.
Thanks, Carl. Questions for Carl?
Have you seen any improvement from since you've finished up Parker River as far as the water quality improvement?
We will be doing water quality analysis this summer again, because the channel through there was not fully opened. We weren't realizing the full flush until later on, close to some. So we aren't seeing that. And for the most part, to get a lot of the water exchange and improvements, not only with water quality, but salt marsh health, shellfish propagation and restoration of habitat on that, we're probably looking at a good year to 2 years out before we really start seeing, visible changes and improvements. But I'm very hopeful. We are getting great exchange going through there. We've seen a lot of sediment transport. We unfortunately have to do some emergency dredging late this summer because of migrating sand from the project, just because of the amount of volume of water going through. That will also reach an equilibrium as well. So I'm anticipating not having those issues in the near future. So I'm very pleased.
Terrific.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Carl? You're getting away easy, Carl.
I am, and I thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too.
We have Scott.
The next one would be Scott Gilmore, golf. I'll share his presentation.
Hey there, Scott. Welcome.
How you doing?
Good, thank you. Help yourself.
Pretty good.
Take it away.
All right, so with work with the golf enterprise, we came up with a kind of a new mission statement here that works better off for us. Yarmouth Golf is dedicated to providing and maintaining inclusive, accessible, superior quality public golf courses for Cape Cod residents and visitors, which benefits Yarmouth's local economy, health, and charitable fundraising. We are committed to enhancing and preserving the golf properties for future generations through improvement programs for the courses, facilities, and equipment. Ever mindful, we are environmental stewards of the vital open space. Next slide, please. So here are the things we noticed and what's kind of happened in the last year or so. Obviously, with COVID and everything, golf was one of the big things with people being outside. So we had near record rounds played in 2021. Obviously, we did very well in FY21. We are continuing to do well in FY22. A couple of things that we put in this year to help us run more efficiently is Club Profits, our new point of sale system that's been implemented, and we are now fully switched over on that. We have new GPS systems that arrived in November for the carts. We installed a new roof to the Bayberry Clubhouse. That one was actually leaking water into the clubhouse, so that wasn't good. We got that fixed. We should be working on the siding and windows this winter to get that done as well for the building. As I mentioned, in FY21, we did finish with approximately 1.4 million in net revenues. So we had a banner year, and we are very busy this year. Obviously, it's not at COVID levels, but we are continuing down a good path here. We are also continuing to make improvements to the courses this winter through tree removal, brush clearing, and a few minor changes here and there to the holes to help improve play. Another thing I want to hit on, we actually do not run the restaurants anymore. That was awarded to Chess Hospitality in April, I believe. So, our numbers will be a little off depending on how you look at it, because we don't take obviously any restaurant revenue. So we got to make sure we separate that. Next slide, please. So we are, as you can see, we're on track with where we are in FY22. FY21, we ended up spending about $3.7 million, but we took in about 5.1 to make that 1.4. We are proposing a little bit of increase in FY23 at 4.48 million there to cover some additional wages that are needed. We're obviously tremendously understaffed with COVID, making things hard to staff up the place. And we have rising costs on fuel, chemicals, fertilizers, credit card expenses. Since that is a big thing now, not a lot of people use cash. They've kind of all moved to electronic forms of payment. Next slide, please. So big changes that were in the budget is where we currently have 11 employees and we are allocating for the 15 that we need. This is something that we put in last year as well, but we did gain, it's actually, sorry, we lost one and gained one during last year. We had two, but we lost one at the same time after that. And then on the expenses side, like I said, that's increased a little over 100,000. And those are the main reasons why. Fertilizer has gone up roughly 150% in 1 year. Chemicals have gone up 15% and they're going up another 5%. Fuel is way up, as everybody knows. And then we have a few others that are just, metal's gone up. Just everything that we need has kind of gone up with everything, with inflation and everything. Next slide, please. So our biggest challenges are staffing right now. We're finding it very hard to staff the golf courses, especially on the maintenance end. The more labor intensive, it's very hard to find seasonal help to help us get all the mowings done. For the operations side, starters and rangers and process staff, it's a little easier. We can deal more with retirees that like to play golf and work 20 to 30 hours a week, if not even, just to fill those needs. But maintenance wise, we were really struggling, as is almost every golf course. Another big thing is keeping up on the capital side. Both facilities are aging, especially Bass River. We haven't done really any work over there in many years, and we need to upgrade. For the Bass River wastewater agreement in Bass River there, that would be beneficial for us. And wastewater, at some point, Bass River needs to be used for wastewater, and we would be a beneficial of that because it would cover some costs needed to do a lot of the needs over there that we need. We're in a few years going to have to put an irrigation system in. We need to do a bunker renovation. We have safety issues with the course. Clubhouse is aging, maintenance facilities aging. So we just don't want to, do any of these, if we know wastewater is coming down the pipeline in a few years, we want to make sure it's a good partnership. And one of the other big challenges we face is managing pass holder expectations on tee times. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but we get a lot of complaints on members not getting tee times, but it's more the fact that the golf course is plenty available. We struggle with getting members to play in the afternoon where there's ample tee times. A lot of people like to play in the morning and that goes for everybody, but there's only a limited amount of morning tee times. So it's not that they can't play, they just want to play in the morning. So that's one of the biggest challenges we face in to manage their expectations. But the golf courses are available for everybody every day. Next slide, please. So some of the recommendations, we did go to town meeting in October and get 100,000 to do the new siding, windows, and doors at Baby Air Clubhouse. That's part of the phase 2, as I like to call it, to secure that building up. We did the roof last winter. We'll do the rest this winter to make sure we're good on the building. We're looking into a possible function facility at Baby Air House. Both courses, we're kind of lacking that one need we need to continue. We can't really host any major events like tournaments or something like that because we don't have a space to put them afterwards. So it's a big struggle to even get in that kind of competition market, just because we don't have the 140 seat or 150 seat facility to put people to have a sit down dinner or whatever they might have after they are on the golf course. So we're working at that. We're also looking at master plans for the links course. That is one of the areas that is in need of significant work. Bunkers, big time drainage issues. When you get rains like tonight, we can't even get out there. It's so wet. And forward tees. Another part of that links course would be running a pipe from the treatment facility to our pond to take their water directly. That's a benefit for DPW and us, so we can use more of their water. And as we always do, we'll continue to work with the GEC and other departments in town to ensure our success. I did get some of your questions. I can address those now if you want.
Let's see if there are any questions from members of the committee first. I want to be very mindful of time. We are rapidly approaching 8 o'clock.
Okay.
George?
Scott, you mentioned that, this year wasn't as good as the year before in terms of revenue. You have any explanation for that other than less people are playing golf?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very good. I want to be clear, it's been very good, but with COVID year, that was we were sold out every single day. We just didn't see that because there was more things to do this year than during the peak of COVID. That was the year where you couldn't go really anywhere inside. It was almost, you have to do everything outside.
I know, I was the one that was trying to get a tee time in the afternoon after everybody. I couldn't play with anybody because I immunocompromised, but there were a couple of days I couldn't get a tee time anytime.
Right. And we were aware
that didn't happen this year.
But yeah, it's so to compare from previous to COVID, if you take out the restaurants, we're over $700,000 up over FY20 when before COVID happened. So we're doing very well still. It's just it's impossible to hit COVID numbers. I mean, because there's just so much more things to do than there was during that year.
So if you took the restaurant out of 2 years ago, how comparable are they?
So that's what I'm saying. If you remove the restaurants from the equation, we're about $700,000 above where we were before COVID in gross revenue. If you include the restaurant, it's about 400,000. But since we don't run the restaurant anymore, we try to just not include it because it just doesn't help us with our numbers.
Well, that answered one of my questions. I'd say my only other big one is making sure that I'm, reading this accurately. It does look like you've got a balanced budget in terms of revenues in paying for it, as opposed to taking funds from the town's general fund. Is that accurate?
Right, that's correct. Actually, there's a payback going to the town in this budget for the loan we received.
Congratulations.
280,000 going back to the town from the loan.
Congratulations. That's great. I can bypass the rest of my questions. I don't think we need to take much more time with that. Any other members want to add any questions for Scott?
Scott, I got one question. Maybe you can't talk about this, but damage was done to Bass River a couple of weeks ago. We know who did it. Are we being compensated for the damage and the lost revenue? Is that all being taken up by insurance?
Yeah, it kind of roped into an insurance claim at this point, and
All right, so
submitted to the police, and we have to go. It
Okay.
could be a long time before it's resolved. So, but it is in the process.
okay.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions for Scott, I want to thank him for his presentation and joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott.
So
The
Bill,
next item on the agenda is preliminary votes for the departments. What we thought about was if we sort of did a preliminary recommendation to approve these budgets, that you're near that presentation, or it's happened this evening, rather than trying to do it all at the end. And then when we do finalize the report, we'll sort of review everything then. But that's the next item on the agenda is preliminary votes for the above departments. So we get an idea of where we are with these departments. So then when we go to the other ones, we'll have clarity at the very end.
yeah, and just to remind everyone, this does not preclude us, if situations change, from going back and amending that. It's a preliminary vote. So if, something drastic happens, we would be able to, it would be our final report to town meeting. So unless there are any objections to doing that, I'd like to entertain a motion. And let me ask first, does anyone have any objections to just doing a straight up or down vote on all departments? Or any department that they want to take out and vote separately, that they had any questions or any concerns about? I think that might be the most expeditious fashion, as long as that's appropriate, Bill.
I would move we approve them all.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. We'll do a roll call. George.
Aye.
Okay, Robert.
Aye.
Nate.
Aye.
And Jack.
Aye.
I am an aye as well. And of course, Brian is not. Brian is absent. Okay, well, we flew through that last agenda item. I know that the time is getting very late. If members are able to stick around just for a moment, I think we can forego the second to last item with regard to the appointing authority. I don't know that we have any news on that, but maybe Bill, if you want to take a moment to explain the budget books. I see.
Sure. On the appointing authority, I will have a letter in your next packet so we can pick it up at the next meeting. You have the two issues of that where you want to get another member appointed and address the issue of member that will be out for some time. So the budget books, you should have, each of you should have them. The front of the budget book before the table of contents as the town administrator's message and the presentation and other materials that were referred to. After that, you should have the table of contents with the budgets, not necessarily in the sequence of our presentations, but it has all the material that was given to us by the finance department. You have additional materials in terms of narratives in these presentations. As we finish up these presentations, what I'll do is punch holes in them and sort of copy them and get them to you to put into your budget books as we go through each set of groups. The end of the budget book, I've included the capital improvements plan and the presentation for that. And also anything that has been sort of correspondence from either the finance director or the town administrator that's gone to the finance committee, I'm just going to put that in the end. So as we move forward, we'll have packets available and we will punch holes in the material and give you hard copies. And then we'll make them available at town hall so people can pick up. We'll probably try to do that on Thursdays, and then so it gives you Friday and then Monday, but most of the material will be, if it's new material, emailed to you, but also provided in hard copy for your budget book. So everything should be there. If there's any additional material, what I think we should do is just have committee members email through the chair to me to be able to augment this material. And again, we'll try to have it by, let's say, noon on Thursdays so that you can come and pick it up in hard copy, but we also email it to you. And we are keeping apprised of the selectmen's budget books so that, you know, there is commensurate material in both budget books to make sure that they're synonymous.
Thanks, Bill. Questions for Bill? Okay, and hopefully, you know, as we get used to, you know, getting the materials ahead of time, which is great to get in the practice of doing that. You know, we'll all have an opportunity to get in the habit of, you know, submitting some questions ahead of time and, you know, making sure that you know, I think it'd be great to just see some of those questions kind of weaved into the presentations. So we're not necessarily have to ask for them twice. But I think this is a good approach for us. Unless there are any other comments or questions, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Second from George. All right. George. All those in favor, George.
Aye.
Jack.
Aye.
Nate.
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Robert has left us and Brian is on leave, but I think that is sufficient to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Bill, I sent you an email. Let's touch bases offline.
All right.
Thanks.